What do a monkey and an alien have in common? They both destroyed the video game economy. Donkey Kong 64 is an incredibly divisive game. Developed by Rare for the Nintendo 64, it was the first 3D adaptation of Donkey Kong, and had a lot to live up to both as a follow-up to the Donkey Kong Country trilogy, and as Rare's second 3D platformer following Banjo-Kazooie. The game was fairly standard when it came to the genre: enter a stage, collect the shiny things, leave and move on to the next level, repeat as needed. There are 5 different Kongs to unlock, each with their own moveset, special abilities, and collectibles. Speaking of which, there's one thing about Donkey Kong 64 that set it apart from its predecessors: the staggering amount of collectibles. How many? Well, if you check the Gamer edition of Guinness World Record books, you'll see that it's exactly 3,821, which is wrong. If you truly want everything, you'll have 201 golden bananas, 8 boss keys, 3,500 colored bananas, 974 banana coins, 40 banana medals, 10 battle crowns, 40 blueprints, 20 banana fairies, 1 Nintendo coin, and 1 Rareware coin, adding to a total of 4,795 collectibles. Why is there a difference? Well, you only need 160 of the banana coins to pay for all of the upgrades, leaving 814 unaccounted for. It's also worth mentioning that one of the set of coins was only recently discovered in 2017 by Twitch streamer Isotarge, hidden under some tall grass in Fungi Forest. Not sure why they didn't count the rest of the coins, too much work? Bottom line is, it's a ridiculous amount of items. Out of curiosity, of course, I counted every collectible in Mario 64. There's 120 stars, 2 keys, 3 cap switches, and 2,672 coins, which gives us 2,797 collectibles. I suppose there's an argument to be made about not counting out-of-stage coins since they're not totaled up in any screen. That would bring our total down to 2,215, not even half of Donkey Kong 64's count. So yeah, lots of collectibles. This is an often quoted downside of Donkey Kong 64, but of course not the only one. Others quote the backtracking of having 5 different Kongs explore the level. Others talk about the brutal late-game minigames. All of these complaints coalesce into the belief that Donkey Kong 64 killed 3D Collect-a-thon games. I'm not exaggerating, this is a common belief, that one game had enough impact or at least contributed a lot to kill off an entire genre. Here, I've got a few spicy quotes for you. Jeremy Parrish of the US Gamer says, "Hunting endlessly for collectibles undermines any good you might find here with sheer, crushing tedium." Michael Rago writes on Complex, "How Nintendo ever let this game slide is a mystery, but even more baffling is why anyone remembers it fondly." Moving on from just some random dudes, even one of the developers of Hat in Time said, "I don't want to blame it all on Donkey Kong 64, but it's partially at fault." Not quite as scathing, but I think this drives the point home that this game is not fondly remembered. But if the game is hated as everyone tends to think, why is it still so relevant? It constantly comes back for one reason or another. I already mentioned the rainbow coin getting discovered in 2017. The DK rap is memed to this day, with alternate versions, remixed into new genres, and whatever. And then we can't forget the monumental stream from H-Bomber where he 101%ed the game while raising over $340,000 for the charity Mermaids, that an American congresswoman co-commentated for a portion of.
There we go.
Hello?
Hi.
My name is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. I am the Congresswoman for New York's 14th Congressional District. Trans rights, absolutely. It's a no-brainer. Trans rights are civil rights, are human rights.
Wild. So, I played it to completion. I needed to know how this game is by experiencing every little bit of it. And now I think I'm finally ready to throw my opinion into the pile of opinions by people that probably care about it a lot more than me. Here's a little background on me and my experience with the game before playing it. So I play a lot of 3D platformers, I play loads of Super Mario 64 ROM hacks, and I'm currently a bit on a run of wanting to play all of the 3D Collect-a-thons out there. I've still yet to work my way through games like Yooka-Laylee and, Glover. But I think I have quite a bit of experience with the genre to base my comparisons of Donkey Kong 64 on. As far as previous experience with Donkey Kong 64 goes, I had the game as a kid. I never thought too much of it though. I never got too far in the game either. I usually end up stopping around World 2, Angry Aztec, for reasons we'll cover later. So I don't really have a lot of nostalgia associated with the game, so don't worry about that, I suppose. I started out my playthrough with a 12-hour straight stream, as any sane person would, and honestly, great first impression. As you start the game, it's obvious that it just oozes personality. I mean, it starts with a rap of all things to explain the Kong's personalities and abilities. But beyond that, I just found myself stopping to watch a lot of the idle animations. I'm pretty sure you can stay on the main menu for an hour and not see every animation they have set to play. Every Kong has a few idle animations they can pull from just when they're standing around, but what really blows me away is the character select screen. The Kongs will start acting like they're the biggest shit when you're hovering over them, and get upset if you swap away, except for Chunky. Little weenie boy. He whimpers when you're over him and is visibly relieved when you swap off. They did not have to do this, but they did, for the vibes. Oh, also, Donkey Kong has 3 different slipping animations, and there's only one place in the entire game that you could slip in the starting room of Donkey Kong's house where there's a few bananas littered on the floor. 3 animations for something that you probably won't do. For the whole 12 hours I was playing the game with no breaks, despite any backtracking I had to do, hunting through for the bananas I still need, the endless onslaught of entertaining animations kept me going. Not just the animations, of course, the music ranged from decent to memorable, the platforming is honestly pretty good, but the standout part of the game, other than the animations, has to be the graphics. Now listen, I know we're talking about a Nintendo 64 game, how good can it be? Well, I do want to say that one of the main reasons my playthroughs usually ended at World 2 is because every single world after World 2 is dark and dingy. I never really thought about it much why they'd make the worlds dark, but yes, they are, and it can suck. But now I know why they made over half the game so dark. Man, this game has an insane lighting system. I'm not going to pretend that I know a darn thing about anything to do with Donkey Kong 64 under the hood, but I do know that it looks nice. And looking at details of the creation of the game, one of their focuses was actually showing off a new lighting system they had implemented. I mostly realized this while I was doing the minecart minigame in Fungi Forest. In this section, you find yourself flying through a cave with various colors of lights flickering on the walls, fire and explosions creating flashes of light with enemies and hazards flying at you the whole time. And somehow the game still runs. Probably partly thanks to the expansion pack. Oh yeah, the expansion pack happened. Donkey Kong 64 was planned to release with the Nintendo 64 disk drive, and I think you know how that went. As in, it didn't. Instead, they made up for the lack of the drive with an expansion pack that came free with the game, and apparently it was a great price to both Rare and Nintendo. But since the game was built from the ground up with the expansion pack in mind, they couldn't just throw it out. So they did everything they could to make the most out of that pack, and it absolutely shows. At this point, you probably noticed that I've been praising a lot, but I haven't talked about the gameplay much. Yeah. You know what? No. There's not really any point where I was actively suffering while looking around stages for anything I missed. This is partly due to the platforming of the game being extremely forgiving. I could count on one hand how many times I died due to missing jumps or by being swarmed by enemies. The devs at least seemed aware that the exploration of the stages was challenge enough. So the late game platforming challenges are somewhat difficult, but you'll rarely be losing any more than a piece of health for messing up, so I can appreciate that. And even if you do die, you just respawn at the beginning of the level or whatever loading zone you last walked in through, so there's no life counter and it seems way ahead of its time for that. Unfortunately, the game isn't just platforming and exploring. There's minigames. So many minigames. Most of them aren't that bad, but of course the ones that aren't bad do have harder versions. So let's go over them. We have Batty Barrel Bandit, Big Bug Bash, Busy Barrel Barrage, the arcade Donkey Kong game, the ZX Spectrum Jetpack game, Crazy Kong Clamor, Kremling Kosh, Mad Maze Mall, the Minecart Ride, Minecart Mayhem, which yes is different, Peril Path Panic, Searchlight Seek, Speedy Swing Sortie, Splish Splash Salvage, Stash Snatch, Stealthy Snoop, Teetering Turtle Trouble, and Beaver Bother. So the thing about these is they're all either pathetically easy or just impossible. Listen, we can ignore like almost all of these, but I just want to bring attention to the arcade Donkey Kong game, Crazy Kong Clamor, and Beaver Bother. So first with Kong Clamor. It's not that bad if you're playing on the original Nintendo 64. So Donkey Kong 64 did a thing where whenever the game lags, they sped up the player's movement speed so that it wouldn't be noticeable. And it worked. But you can imagine that if it had to do this, the game lagged pretty often. This carried over into the minigames, and the devs took it into account. In Crazy Kong Clamor, the screen will fade to black and then fade in with 5 Kongs and a golden banana in a random spot. You need to react fast enough to shoot the golden banana. If you shoot a Kong, you lose a point. This timing is pretty tight. So tight, in fact, that if you're playing on the Wii U Virtual Console, or emulator, which doesn't have lag, it's pretty near impossible to react fast enough. I'm 24, so I know my reaction time is declining, but it's not that bad. So what you need to do is use pause buffering to win the minigame, and I give my blessings every day that my chat told me that I could do it, otherwise I would be still playing the minigame to this day. Real quick though, there's one other banana that gave me a ton of trouble due to the lack of lag, and it's a race in Fungi Forest where this rabbit goes so damn fast that I had to use an exploit to grab the speed upgrade that Lanky gets before the race started, which would allow me to just barely inch out a victory. Anyway, moving on to the next minigame, Donkey Kong. Yes, this is just straight up the Donkey Kong arcade game. You need to beat it once for a golden banana and then once more on hard mode for the Nintendo coin. It's required. No matter what, even in any percent where you only need 100 of the 201 golden bananas to beat the game. Now personally, I've played more than my fair share of Donkey Kong, so I consider myself to be fairly decent at it. So when all was said and done, it didn't take me too long to beat it. Hard mode took quite a few tries, especially since you only get one life, but it's still not too bad. However, I'm not blind to my privilege. It is nuts that they made a pretty difficult arcade game that a good amount of players would definitely never have seen before, made it harder, and then made it give you one of the only collectibles in the entire game that is required to be collected no matter what. The only other collectibles I can think of are the first few golden bananas when you have nothing else to choose from. I have no idea what was going through their minds. It's not even the main gameplay of the game, it's a mini game. Why? But that's nothing. Easy. Child's play compared to Beaver Bother. Let me explain. Beaver Bother is a minigame where you play as a little claptrap and you herd the beavers that spawn around a barrel into a hole in the middle. Simple enough. Now follow me here. There's an invisible wall surrounding the hole in the middle, and you need to use the will of God to get the beaver to clip through it. They just stop at the hole. It's unbelievable. So get this, you get the joy of doing this minigame 3 times. Once in an easier difficulty in World 3 Frantic Factory. Then you get the hard version of the minigame twice, both in Creepy Castle, the final stage. Why? Why twice? Why this specific minigame? Did they playtest this? Like, I feel like I don't have to explain the specifics of how the beavers do and don't go in, because you see it. You're watching them run up to the hole and stop on a dime. Now listen. I know the trick is to go at them with a bit of a specific diagonal angle. That tip only helps so much. You can only mess up like 3 or 4 times, then you're out of luck with that super tight timer. And hey, this is a game for children. This is more of a tactical strategy minigame than anything else, and I could hardly get to being okay at it. Thank goodness this minigame isn't required at all for the base completion of the game, but lord. But yeah, other than that, I found exploring the worlds to be just fine. It helps that you only need a fraction of all the colored bananas and banana coins even for 101%, and you find those naturally just going for the golden bananas. I only recall going out of my way for maybe 5 banana medals, if that. So really, there was a bit of backtracking, but it was really only painful if I didn't have a good grasp on the level layout, which only happened a few times in Frantic Factory and Crystal Caves. I guess I do have a bit of a gripe with a lot of stages not having notable landmarks to wrap your mental map around. It's a shame because the DK Isles are designed so well, but the stages tend to be large several rooms connected by identical hallways, which is a similar problem to what Banjo-Tooie had. I'd talk more about collecting the banana fairies and crowns, but honestly, they're all in obvious locations if you're getting all the golden bananas anyway. You have to go back to Worlds 1 and 2 for the fairies since you need Tiny Unlock to even collect them. But again, you probably already found them, and you have to go back for the new golden bananas anyway. I'm not going to say that the backtracking doesn't suck, but I honestly think it's comparable to Super Mario 64, where you have to start back at the beginning of the stage after every single star you collect. Still not a good thing, but it's an industry standard for the genre at this point. Banjo-Kazooie was just a nice surprise. And then, blueprints are basically another golden banana, but with the bonus of if you collect them all, you get a longer time limit on the final stage, which yes, is timed. It's a neat touch to add a bit of variety to the collecting, I suppose, even if I do just kill every single curse splat in the same way. Speaking of combat, I've somehow not mentioned the bosses up to this point. And that's all we have to talk about Donkey Kong 64. Okay, we have to talk about them. The bosses are a metronome of quality. Some of them, such as Puff Toss and the Armadillo, are highlights of the game, showing some nice moody atmosphere and flashy moves. Others are Mad Jack. I hate Mad Jack. And then the second to last boss of the game is a cardboard cutout of K. Rool. Very on brand for Rare though. I am a fan of the way you get to these bosses though. You need to collect a certain amount of colored bananas from each stage, usually a pretty forgiving number. Feed them to this, and then they let you into the boss. Simple enough. And it gives the colored bananas a purpose, something Nintendo has struggled to give coins in the Mario series for such a long time. But you go in, beat the boss, and you get a key. Sometimes this unlocks your ability to go to the next world, sometimes it doesn't, but you do need all 8 keys to finish the game. And that about covers it. All of the highs and all of the lows of my playthrough of Donkey Kong 64. Overall, it was a pretty positive experience, but I won't pretend that playing it as an event on stream, with occasional voice calls with my friend Jamie, who's way more versed in the game than I am, didn't help. I imagine playing it by yourself in a dark room with a half-drank Mountain Dew isn't quite as enthralling, but it is what it is. So back to our question, did Donkey Kong 64 ruin the 3D Collect-a-thon genre? It should be said, even if we determine that it did, that there were still a few Collect-a-thons that came out after Donkey Kong 64, such as Mario Sunshine and Rare's own Banjo-Tooie, both with their own fair share of glaring flaws. Sunshine with its odd completion criteria making almost half of the game pointless for completion progress, and Tooie with its ambitious everything. A lot more problems than I can just mention and move on from, but it repeats a lot of the same problems Donkey Kong 64 has, with, in my opinion, not as much personality to even it out. Now there are more games in the genre since, like SpongeBob Battle for Bikini Bottom and Toy Story 2. But there was a noticeable drop in the release count up until recently when games like Hat in Time and Yooka-Laylee seeked to revive the genre. Even 3D Mario games moved away from collectibles after Sunshine, opting for a more linear level format until Odyssey. Is Donkey Kong 64 to blame? I'm gonna look at the reception that the game had, because obviously my experience of playing the game doesn't line up with the whole ruining the genre deal at all. It had nearly perfect scores. Only a handful of publications gave it anything lower than an 8 out of 10. It won a few awards even, such as Best Platforming Game and Best Overall Game of 1999. The same year that Pokemon Snap came out. Along with this, there were a lot of pretty critical reviews of the time. It was obvious that people were getting a bit frustrated with 3D platformers becoming formulaic, especially Rare's 3D platformers, and I honestly can't say that they're wrong. But the same reviewers who said these things still gave the game decent scores, so there must have been something that nearly offset the downsides. This all changed a few years down. YouTube reviewers, professional reviewers, all looking back at the game in retrospect, knowing that the 3D Collect-a-thon genre is practically dead, and DK64 being one of the most notable games for turning the genre up to 11. Notable is the change of the reception of a game shifting from reviewers and whatever you'd hear at school or work, to the widespread reception of all consumers on social media. If Donkey Kong 64 was released today with modern tweaks and visuals and whatnot, it's hard to say how well it would have done, with many people talking about how repetitive it is, or how they got burnt out on the game before finishing. But that's a common sentiment among a lot of the reviews I looked at for this video. I had to know the vibe of the community at large before making a video like this, and quite a few had a similar experience with each other. The personality is there, and the gameplay is not. Despite not minding the gameplay personally, I can acknowledge this. I think I came to realize as I started writing the video that that's the main problem. Any game genre can have a good personality, visuals, and music, but the only thing that's unique to 3D platformers is what DK64 failed at. Despite having fairly good review scores, the gameplay left a bad taste in many of the reviewers' mouths, many of them mentioning that the entire genre is starting to go down a very repetitive and boring route. And looking at the games at the time, I gotta agree. Collect-a-thons were a very popular type of game to be made right as 3D games started to hit their stride, but as far as they went, they all had nearly the exact same type of gameplay and progression. The most that would be different is the movement speed and various techniques for getting around the stage. So Collect-a-thon games needed to innovate to be able to break free of this preconception. What do they do? The way I see it, the way of improving the Collect-a-thon template was to not be a Collect-a-thon. Take a look at Conker's Bad Fur Day, another Rare game. The first third of the game is your average Collect-a-thon fare, but then you see a sudden shift into somewhat linear missions with a crazy variety of gameplay styles, jumping from parody to parody both of video games and movies. And it all paid off, at least from looking at the reviews at the time. Lots of reviews praised the heavier focus on jokes and story with a few nitpicks on camera, collision, and the usual suspects, but the game was still seen as a huge success. I suppose it helps that the game took nearly 4 years to complete, so they could watch the successes and blunders of many other games that came out through that time. Then looking at Nintendo themselves, a lot of games that basically acted as a Collect-a-thon, such as the 3D Zelda series, Luigi's Mansion, and the Mario series itself, became vastly different by changing up movement, focusing on story, or simply transitioning to linear formats. And so the classic 3D platformer Collect-a-thon slowly faded out of style. Let's answer that question now. No, Donkey Kong 64 did not single-handedly knock out the Collect-a-thon genre, but it was the point where people started realizing that just increasing the number of collectibles or dressing up the same Collect-a-thon adventure in a different way wasn't going to work anymore. I would say that it, along with a couple of other big titles that didn't quite cut it, started the transition away from the classic genre. I could perhaps even admit that it was the largest contributor, if only by a small amount. Nowadays, we're lucky enough to have a lot of support for the 3D Collect-a-thon, with games blowing past their fundraising goals, the big companies being willing to explore the core genre a bit more, and with enough developers with different ideas and visions to help each game have its own identity and uniqueness so it doesn't become another generic scavenger hunt. Thank you for staying with me all the way to the end of the video. I intend on doing more of this style of video essay, so let me know what you think about it. Tell me if there's anything you'd like to see or just any criticism you may have. Thank you.